Okay, good morning folks. It's a pleasure to be in Finland. Really nice to be here, and I've seen my first wild bears last night. But the experience was quite interesting as well, because there was a wonderful soundscape which I've never really appreciated before. Sitting in the silence in the highland, there's all these strange gurgling sounds. And I realised it's the soundscape of the intestine that was very sort of audible while I was looking for the bears. So interesting, you know, there's a tourism opportunity everywhere. Anyway, what I want to do today is talk about wildlife tourism. It's a big subject, it's a huge subject, it incorporates many things. It can be minimal development, it can be very, very high development. So I want to talk about some of the different types, and then, but within that, focus on some themes and the importance of infrastructure and interpretation and the story of experience. And I want to move away from the big and spectacular and the dangerous. So I've got a photograph of an elephant later on, but we're not going to focus on the elephant. We'll focus on something else. Hopefully at the end I can just look at a survey of tour operators in Western Australia, what they saw as impediments to wildlife tourism development, and then look at the Sustainable Tourism CRC in Australia and the Wildlife Tourism Australia Association. Right, so just as a background and overview, the global interest in tourism, and the slide at the bottom here, this is a place called Monkey Mia in Western Australia. In the 1970s you could go here and you could interact with dolphins, and you might see 5 or 10 people there. These days there's resort development, there's a second hotel development, there may be as many as 400 people lined up on this beach. And what really made the dolphin tourism here take off was a listing in the Lonely Planet Guide. That Lonely Planet Guide listing focused attention for travellers in Western Australia, and since that time this tourism industry has become one of the really iconic tourism destinations in Western Australia. And what I won't get into is what people may think of the development or the environmental impacts. That's another thing that I'm interested in. But you can see that tourism has developed quite strongly here over time, as reflected by there's a Minto, a British group, say that focusing on the UK as well, but looking at global trends, up to 3 million people a year specifically taking wildlife tourism trips. But the thing to note is the continuing growth and the big money involved. Economically in Australia, it's been said to be worth 33 billion Australian dollars. That's a lot of money, that's a huge amount of money. But of course, with the Travel Research Australia, they don't really pin down what wildlife tourism is. So what's lumped into it is visits to national parks, zoos, gardens and things. So the actual wildlife tourism component of this may be something smaller, but even if it's a third, even if it's 10 billion, that's still an awful lot of money. And Australia has a long established history of wildlife tourism, fortunate to have very strong marine resources. It's got a very high biodiversity in the flora, unique and endemic species, lots of stuff going on. And it varies greatly, as we'll see, it varies greatly. You've got businesses and non-government organisations involved, sometimes in partnership, sometimes not. There are captive facilities, and then there's free-range, non-captive facilities. And the organisations in the industry, some of them run very expensive operations. This whale shark operation will cost you $400 or $500 Australian dollars to go on a trip. And why is that? Well, they need a boat, they need a spotter plane to find the whale sharks. There's staff on board, there's food supplied, you need several people jumping in the water looking after people. There's snorkeling equipment involved, so it's very, very expensive. There are other ones where you might go to Queensland in Eastern Australia, and there'll be someone who takes you out on a nocturnal tour on a demand basis, which is of course much, much cheaper. But like all things, the tourism in Australia is subject to variation. You know, if there's a cyclone that brings things down, economic conditions and so on. So we must always be aware that there will be fluctuations like that. But even despite that, tourism in Australia continues to grow. Something interesting to think about here is the evolution of some tourism products. This is a tourism product which focuses on fundamentally one species. This is the fairy penguin. Fundamentally on one species. It's Phillip Island on the southern coastline in the central part of Australia. And you can see the island gets 3.5 million visitors per year, and there's almost 750,000 people seeing the penguin parade. And what the penguin parade is that the penguins have been feeding during the day, and at night as the sun goes down, there's hundreds of them come waddling up the beach. They come waddling up the beach, and people over time have accumulated there to see these penguins. Now, the interesting thing is that over time the demand has created an evolution of tourism development. So now you have a whole suite of different things to cater for the different people's approach. Elevated viewing stadium that may be able to seat more than 500 people. And some people go there, I don't want to see that. I don't want to sit with 500 people. I have no wildlife experience. So, all right. So over time, we get a more exclusive viewing platform, limited to 170 people a day. And there's a demographic that says, well, no, I want something a bit more special. And you get the story. You get the story. It comes down to people, and of course, this becomes more expensive, where you can go with a ranger, have a conversation with a ranger, have a relationship with a ranger for an entire day. You go to a private beach where no one else goes, and it's limited to 10. It caters for all those different views. So if someone's totally appalled by the concept of a viewing stadium, they can go and do something else. So that's how some tourism operations have evolved over time. Wildflower tourism. Now, this is something, of course, you might say, well, okay, Australia is very rich in wildflowers, but everywhere has got flora that can be capitalised on. There's a list there of all the things about Australian flora, but the point I want to make is that I'm from England originally, and I moved to Australia in 1987. And this park in 1987 was a fantastic, well, it still is, a biodiversity spot, but you couldn't get in there. There were no roads. So you would say, well, I want to go and see the wildflowers. Well, you know, where can I go? No maps. It was a problem. But over time, the tourism development came. But not until quite recently, like around about 2000. So it's still quite recent, this. And then it starts up by using interpretive panels, and then you get an introduction to Mount Lezeur National Park, and it's very important for flora, many different communities. But the question is if you're running a tour from Perth in Western Australia and you want to take a busload of people up there, in the past you had to get out by the side of the road and look along the side of the road for things, and you might see some stuff. But this tourism development that is now in place is a much more exciting prospect. So what they did, they built a road in. Because this is very sensitive vegetation. If you have people stopping by the side of the road here and walking in, trampling the vegetation, it can damage the vegetation and create problems and degrade the site. So you build a road in. You put areas where people can stay and have a picnic and read interpretive panels. I haven't seen any interpretive panels in Finland. I'm sure, I haven't been around here very long, but I'm sure they're used widely globally. But the interpretive panels introduce the visitors to the geology, and then there's a focus on specific plants. And you've got different walk trails. This is a walk trail for people who need a wheelchair and can't walk very well. You can see the rich flora and the photography taking place. And there are different walk trails in addition to that. So you might have your day use centre here, and then you've got different walk trails which are formed differently, so a little bit rougher, so you want to walk a bit further, and less intensive preparation. But the point is about this is that you have a national park which is rich in flora, but its tourism value has been enhanced incredibly. Right? It's a protected environment, but it's got managed access, very important, so you can minimise the impacts. Trail planning and design, interpretation, and you've got all these natural elements that now make it a very strong wildflower safari. And then you have the guided tours. You could go to Western Australia and you can look at a plant and you can think, wow, that is interesting, take a photograph of it, but does it really leave you with something? Whereas if you go with this guy, he can tell the most astonishing stories about the flora. And he goes much further than that. He has a caravan park, and in that caravan park he's set up microscopes with video facilities. So he can show people, he can just pick some of the flowers off and he can show the clients the details of these flowers. And clients can stay in this his laboratory for 6 or 7 hours studying the flora. And there's many different species that you can work with, many different species. Another one, you look at this and you can go on a tour. You can go on a tour and you can see a plant and okay, this is Xanthorrhoea pricei. Yeah, okay. But what about if you've got a story that goes with it? You know, like why, for example, why does it have this skirt of leaves around it? Why is that? And of course, as you know, Australia has fire-prone environments, and the skirt gets burnt off, and you get these things. And this may be in summer, and it may not rain for weeks, and it still starts to degenerate. So the guide can start to tell a story, just cherry picking 1 or 2 plants, and you can spend quite a lot of time thinking, showing the detail of the plant. And I know there's someone here who is interested in developing swamp tourism in Finland. Well, this is the sort of concept that you could use. The structure of aquatic plants, for example. But let's get back to this one. This has got tightly backpacked leaf bases. It excludes oxygen, so the fire cannot get in there. But most extraordinary of all, you see the skirt up there on the right, and then there's a ring of ash that falls around, and the story of this plant, and I think, and you've got plants in Finland that can tell stories, I know you have. I've seen lichens and things already that will be able to tell stories. So the plant retains the leaves because it lives in a nutrient-poor environment, so it wants nutrients, and it doesn't want to lose them, and it doesn't want to lose them to its competitors. So when the fire comes, and if you can keep all your dead leaves around your body, the ash falls around you, and then you can reacquire that. And you can, this is the sort of story that can be developed in terms of wildflower tourism. Now this is, we'll move on to insects and just the sort of detail that you can express. So what tourism is about really, it's about story and experience. People want to take away an experience. I would suggest that anybody who has a nature-based tourism experience and doesn't learn anything, that experience is not so strong. So this is like this is a suburban park, and people can go cycling around here and horse riding around here, but it goes further. And it goes further because there's a display centre, a visitor centre, and it talks about the decline of wetlands globally. So you've got a global issue, and we bring it down to a local situation. And then you've got this nice pond here where visitors are encouraged to explore the pond. So you can see, and there's scope for talking about the adaptations of plants. There's emergent macrophytes, there's submerged macrophytes, there's floating macrophytes. You encourage people to take their bucket and their net and discover it for themselves. Getting people involved. Sometimes if people are being moved from A to B without engaging, it's not such a powerful experience for them. So what this person can do is dip in there Then they can take their sample back to the visitor centre and put it under the microscope. And there's charts there then that they can use and try and identify these things themselves. And they can come away, it's like a suburban park, and yet you can show them something like this Daphnia, and they can see this animal's heart beating. The heart's just behind the head, but you can see the heart beating, and that really does make it a much strong, simple concept. We're not talking about the Serengeti and bison migrating, bison in North America. We've got a little thing from a pond down the road, but we can do a lot with it. This is Dunwich Heath in England, and this is an interpretive panel talking about the bee wolf, and it's a sandbank, and of course this has been artificially created. It's been artificially constructed. Got the bulldozer in there. Think, well, we need some sand that the bee wolf can burrow in. We need a nice sunny spot so it can come out and warm its body up and get its wings going in the morning. Let's see what we can do with it. And of course, it's been colonised by the bee wolf and other species. Fence it off, and you can present it as an additional product. So this Dunwich Heath is a bird watching site, but the bird watchers now have the opportunity to learn about insects. You've got this interpretive panel here, and here's the bee wolf indicated on the right. So you're encouraged to look with your binoculars, so you can say, can you see the bee wolf carrying a honeybee? Can you see it carrying the honeybee to the hole? Because they sting the honeybee, lay the eggs inside, and then the larvae feed on the paralysed honeybee. So, something here. It's simple. Use it, capitalising on what you have around you. So, it's artificially created, but quite effective. And here you can see the holes that the animals are using. You might see this, like I was on a nocturnal walk at Lamington National Park in Queensland East, and we're in the dark, and we've seen possums and kangaroos and frogmouth and owls, and then you come across these seats in the darkness, and you're thinking, "Ooh, what's going on here?" You're in one of these sort of a devil worship site or something like this, something really weird. And of course, so it's a viewing stadium for glowworms. So you can sit it, and what they do, your eyes need to adjust to it, they're on the bank here, and you sit there, and as your eyes get adjusted to the darkness, then you can see stuff like this. The larvae, they produce light, long sticky threads. The prey is attracted to these threads, and then it gets stuck on there, and the larvae can acquire the prey. But there's a lot to talk about there. It requires a damp bank. You could get into what sort of prey they're feeding on, but it's expanding that nocturnal tour, not just nocturnal gliders and things like that, but other things. This is fireflies in Malaysia. So there's a mangrove, and there was the local people didn't even know, we didn't even worry about it, and then there was a Westerner that went there one day and thought, whoa, this has got a potential, and then, yes, I should bring my friends, tell my friends about it. One thing leads to another, and this light display that can be seen in this mangrove system in Malaysia starts to become a tourist attraction. I know that they're a bit fuzzy photos, but you can see this is a mangrove tree. It's completely lit up like a Christmas tree, and they're flashing on and off. And just some data here, like we've got, and this is similar data to what Lassie showed with your development in a sense. But you can see here the tourism growing. So the message here is that we've got a range of products, and that tourism is growing very strongly. Then we might as well go to Western Australia. We've brought the weather with us, so why not actually go there with the slides as well. This is a piece of remnant forest near Perth. You can get there in a day. This is what the woodland and forested environment looks like. And what people go there to bushwalk, to cycle, for peace and quiet, bird watching, and also to view wildlife. Trouble is, that a lot of Australian, they talk about the big 5 in Africa and the small 12 in Australia, and the small 12 are much more difficult to see than the big 5, not because of their smallness, but because they're shy, they are active at night, and also a lot of their populations have been reduced by the introduction of feral predators like the fox and the cat. But, so in here, there's an enclosure has been built, and the original idea for the enclosure was to breed rare marsupials in there and release them into the forest. And someone got the idea, well, why don't we open this up to the public? Why don't we just have a little visitor centre and do some guided tours? This is a numbat that you can see during the day, but you'd be lucky to see it. They're difficult to see, they're extremely shy. But in this nocturnal enclosure, you can see some quite rare animals like bandicoots and bilbies and wooders. This is the visitor centre where you have a pre-talk about the trip. You go in there, there's a pre-talk. And what they do, they're feeding the animals in here as part of that programme. They're feeding them as part of that rehabilitation programme. So I said, well, why not get the public to feed them? Because if we get the public to feed them, the public are sort of helping us feed the animals, but also you can educate the public about the whole issue of feeding animals the appropriate food. How much do you give them? What do you give them? How often do you do it? And then you've got species that are difficult to see and they're shy, but they can be readily seen because of this concept. And added to this concept, then, at the end of this tour, you can say to people, well, go out into the forest. You can drive around in the forest at night, see if you can see these things. And people do see them, not like this, of course. So you've got that, like a double-pronged approach to this. Right, we did some research there. We did some research, and we found that the visitor satisfaction was very high indeed, very high. They love the educational component. They're learning about things, about the bilby and the food that it eats. They're seeing rare marsupials. We call it close encounters of the furry kind, of course. Friendly, knowledgeable guide. In wildlife tourism, this is one of the biggest limitations to good wildlife tourism. This can make and break a wildlife tourism company. It's potentially a big limitation. You need guides who can deliver enthusiastic content. Natural habitat and behaviour, yes, because even though this is an enclosure, they're doing their own thing, and you can see them outside the enclosure. And it's small groups, so people were very happy with it. We'll have to show you a different type of restaurant here. This is a Tasmanian devil restaurant in the island of Tasmania off the southeastern corner of Australia. Now this again is an animal that's very difficult to see in the wild. It's shy and nocturnal, and of course in recent years it's declined because there's a facial tumour disease that is indicated to be associated with the small inbred population. Let's have just a chat about how it works. They use natural roadkill. A lot of wallabies get killed on the road in Tasmania, so they're picked up, collected and checked, and they use those. Then they had to work out what distances to use, and that was a bit of a trial and error at the time because people wanted to be really close to them, and they found that only people had to go, you know, in the hide, and poof, they disappeared. The provider anticipated photography, so purchased cameras that people could put their small cameras on and do the night photography, and use telescopes. Use of a telescope, you can own the viewing. You're looking through the telescope. It's only you looking through that telescope at the time, so you've got ownership of the viewing. What's a really interesting thing here with these Tasmanian devils? They set up microphones near the carcass. Have you ever seen? You may have seen David Attenborough's shows where they. Have you heard the Tassie devil? Have you heard it now? And it's just. I should have the sound, but I haven't got it because I'm useless at technology and I'll probably mess it up. But that is a real interesting twist to provide the sounds. And specimens. They provide specimens of the devil's poo and I'll show you at the end why that's the case. And souvenirs, so they take plaster casts of its footprint, and I'll just, in the next slide you'll see it, and they put information about the Tasmanian devil on the back of it. So there's a whole little package going on here, and people can take away something that can remind them about this. The worry about dependence on food, the facility is operated no more than 3 days in a row and no more than 5 days within a 2-week period, which seems to be workable in reducing dependence. It's a bit fuzzy, I'm sorry about that, but you can see they put information on the back of that, and that's actually quite an interesting little souvenir that you can take away. Then we'll go to the big and spectacular, the megafauna. Now, if you go to Addo Elephant Park in South Africa, if you don't see an elephant, it's considered there's something wrong with you. Like, I don't know, there's something seriously wrong with you if you don't see an elephant. And can you imagine someone like me going on one of these tours and we don't see an elephant? I actually thought it was wonderful. And it's particularly wonderful because that was not a hindrance to the guy running the tour. He would focus on anything that would turn up. So he didn't have a plan even. He would just adapt himself to the situation. So we'd see a sign like this. And I'd never seen a sign like this. Do not drive over dung beetles or elephant dung. I thought it was great. So this is the stimulus for the conversation point. Dung beetles have right of way. It was great. And then you can have a whole conversation essentially about shit. And then because we talked about the elephant transporting nutrients from A to B, how much of the material is utilised in the elephant's gut, the dung beetles using it as breeding, and then it focused us onto rhino toilets and the feces of lions and all sorts of stuff. And we had a whole tour, a conversation about shit, and it was fantastic. How am I doing for time? Time on my time. And there he is. He's an amazing man. He would lean out the car, he'd take a plant, and he'd talk about the ability of this plant to lock up CO2 and its use in order to try and for some people, its potential use in mitigating increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. He was an extremely knowledgeable and enthusiastic, but it was his spontaneity that really came out here. I don't know, do you get the Simpsons here in Finland? You know, Homer Simpson? You know, this is like the dung beetles up there, and this is, you know, it's like Homer Simpson who sees the Duff beer. Well, a bit like me when I see beer, actually, I suppose it's said. And the beetles on a mission, you know, see this and whoa, great. And these beetles are flightless. The density of herbivores in this part of South Africa is so high, the beetles have lost their ability to fly, so they're flightless beetles as well, which makes it critical again in terms of reducing impacts of the traffic driving over them. And there it is. And the point here is again taking the focus away from the really spectacular, like an elephant, and bringing it down to something like this. And I believe that everywhere has got this capacity in terms of its nature-based tourism. And it's about story. You know, you can tell a story about anything. You know, in fact, we did actually see elephants as we were driving out the park. You know, and in a sense, it was a little bit, in a really funny sort of way, a little bit peculiar. But this guy, because of his spontaneity, his ability to extend himself beyond the megafauna, he was bringing in huge visitor satisfaction levels with this with the survey. So, right, for that, is it, when do I finish? 10 past?
Yeah.
That's
another 50. Another 50.
Yeah. So, look, what I've done, I've shown you these examples, and these are examples of how it's done. And of course, what's the message here is that you need a story. There needs to be a story to tell. You need someone who can deliver that content. And you don't have to know everything. You don't have to know everything, but the more you know, of course, it's useful for spontaneity. But if you can know a lot about a few things, that can work really well. Some major points of the talk, and you can see why Australia is an attractive destination, because it's got sea lions. So we know there's a high demand for wildlife tourism. Despite GFCs and terrorism and all the rest of it, the demand is there, domestic and international. And you will see from Australia that some areas capitalise on as many aspects as possible. Do you think you're doing that in Finland? Have you got everything captured, do you think? What's your feeling on that? No. And I believe every species has a story to tell. This is important. And like this situation there, this is Karnak Island off the coast of Perth, the role of interpretation. People have said the Australian sea lion is a boring animal. Okay, well, why is it boring? Because they just lie there sleeping on the beach all day. They don't do anything. And they don't do anything. And because they don't do anything, you've got people like this trying to get them to do something. And this creates a potentially dangerous situation. So this one is set up, it's turning around, it's thinking, it should be sleeping, but it's turning around and thinking, well, what's going on here? This is pretty close contact with the animal. But if people know about these animals, you can increase their visitor satisfaction and you can reduce the risk of problems. Because we ran some visitor surveys on Karnak and you said, well, did you know that a sea lion can outrun you on the beach? No. Did you know that sea lions have bitten people on this beach? No. Did you know that a sea lion has got a bite that's worse than a dog? No. So running this survey over several hundred people, this theme came out. And then, why do you think it's lying on the beach? Because it travels 200 kilometres out to sea. It dives to 150 metres to acquire its food. It's got to avoid sharks and all sorts. It's absolutely buggered. It needs to rest. So then when you present that to people, they go, oh, God, this is quite an interesting animal. So two things, visitor satisfaction and visitor safety. So that work we did on Karnak was important in bringing that out. So the message that even though you've got rich resources, you still need professionally informed tourism development. And that's where the importance of wildlife tourism research comes in, something that Sue and I are involved in. Recognising the issues. There's a survey of tour operators in Western Australia, 100 tour operators. If you wanted to add a new species to your tour, what will stop you doing it? What are the impediments? Well, reliability of sightings. So, like Lassie, you know, we seem to have here a high reliability of seeing bears. So that's good, you know. That's good. But so reliability of sightings can be an impediment. Distance to the wildlife. In Australia, to see certain species, you may have to travel, you know, 2,000 kilometres to see a species. So that might be an impediment. Unrealistic expectations of visitors. For example, this is a real no-no. This is a problem picture. This close contact with the whale on a whale watching trip. You know, if you've got a big group, bigger groups are more difficult to manage. There are some cultures that want to interact more strongly with the wildlife. There's visitors from China can be very keen to get close contact. So as a tour operator, that's something that needs to be understood and managed. So that, you know, and some tour operators think it's just too hard, just don't want to do this. Access issues. The access, like at the Mount Lazur wildflower place that I showed you earlier on. Now that the access is there, your wildlife tourism, the tour operator says, yeah, great, I've got a road, I've got day use areas, I've got interpretive panels, and I've got walk trails. 10 years ago, there was none of that. Regulations. Some tour operators find the regulations very onerous. Well, in Western Australia, there's a stipulation that you need to have knowledge of the wildlife, and some people may think, well, I can't go there. Some concerns on impacts of the animals. Certainly weather and climate, you know, and if it's, in some cases, if it's bucketing down or it's baking hot, it it reduces the prospects of adding new species. Not enough of the animals. Well, there's a deep question there. Why isn't there enough of the animals? Is it because, for example, I went to Vietnam, to Cuc Phuong National Park in Vietnam, bird watching, and I wouldn't have seen anything at all without a really experienced guide. I wanted to see Delacour's langur. Why didn't I see it? They've all been shot out, all hunted out. So there are, this is not likely in Australia. Maybe this is, I don't know. But these tour operators also work overseas as well. So these primates in Vietnam have been shot out, all hunted out. So they were gone, and the birds were so hunting shy that they were very difficult. If you got more than 2 seconds, you felt really good. Lack of knowledge of animals and their locations, and that's what. In Australia, the collaboration between the government and universities with the Sustainable Tourism CRC has addressed this, so that we've got inventories of wildlife tourism. Promotion and marketing. Sometimes people just don't know. And of course, you may have a wildlife tourism product, but if there's nowhere to stay, and of course, if you've got a nice wildlife tourism product and there's somewhere nice to stay, and a nice bottle of wine and a meal on top of it, then you've probably got a good package. Good recipe. So, in red are some of the issues that I've identified, and I think I've got that in a handout for you. And in black is some of the responses to that. Yeah. So, countries and destinations not capitalising on their wildlife. So, inventory of wildlife resources. Now, do you know what your total possibilities are in Finland, for example? Analysis, access, safety and accommodation. Like the tourism, the nuts and bolts of tourism. Is that infrastructure there to support it? Again, deficiency in quality guiding. This is a limitation. I'm interested in geological tourism. I personally believe that you can have a completely flat landscape and make that stunningly exciting, but you need someone who knows what they're on about. So it's a limitation. So deficiency in quality, guiding and interpretation. And then I've put here, there may be problems because you've got conflicts. I don't know, maybe I'd like to be a little bit provocative to you, and then I can have conversations about it over a glass of wine tonight. Is there a conflict between hunting and wildlife tourism in Finland, for example? It's a question to you guys. That's a question that pops up in my mind. But in other cases, for example, in the African Rift Valley, the competing interests are pollution from the surrounding agricultural development. So they're different. But the message is, understand the nature of these factors. And I think Australia did a very strong job, and the Australian government had good advisors. They realised the importance of wildlife tourism and put a lot of money into a collaborative partnership between government departments and universities fundamentally. And what did they do? Like inventory of wildlife tourism assets. So I've put examples of STCRC things that can be downloaded free of charge for all of you guys to put in your libraries. Tasmanian wildlife inventory, just see how they do it. It's an idea. Analysis of tourism. Product development, status assessment of wildlife tourism. Like people, how important are kangaroos, for example? You always see kangaroos. Kangaroos are everywhere. But one of the limitations that we found was interpretation. Like a kangaroo has 4 teats in the pouch. Now, when people have seen kangaroo, you see a kangaroo, great. You go from Europe. It's my first time I've seen a kangaroo. But if there's someone there who says, "Do you know that this animal can go without drinking for months? It's got 4 teats in the pouch, and each teat produces a different quality of milk for the different young. Did you know that the testicles of a male kangaroo hang in the front of the penis? Unlike us, all really, really exciting and interesting things like that. And something that Sue and I have been doing, we did this with whale sharks, we published a paper on this, is that we tested a rapid assessment framework to guide sustainability of marine wildlife, whale shark tourism. I'm there, aren't I?
Well done.
Very quickly, very quickly, Wildlife Tourism Australia. And we can. Will you provide this for these people anyway? Yeah. So you see the text, but it's a group of tour operators that really got their act together, and they would lobby. They would lobby government. They've got their website. They run workshops and conferences. They help with the development of wildlife trails. So it was all working to enhance the wildlife tourism potential and opportunity in Australia. And last, I just want to finish on this. So shit can be really interesting, but what is incredible? Now I'll show. This is elephant shit. And this is an echidna. What they sell at the Tasmanian Devil restaurant is Tasmanian poo with the spines of this echidna in. Just imagine that sort of slipping through the gut. You know, and it leaves people with an everlasting memory of the Tasmanian Devil. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you for a brilliant presentation. No, look at that.
Yes, I would like to ask, when you presented the Tasmanian Devil thing and the other thing with the feeding station, are they run as businesses or are they sort of public service? Is the park service involved? Are they commercial operations?
They're private businesses, and the background to it, is that Tasmanian parks were worried about farmers shooting Tasmanian devils. There was this perception that it was a horrible animal, and it was a real problem, and it would kill, say, lambs, sheep and lambs. But of course, they don't. If you know about the Tasmanian, it doesn't do that. It's a carrion feeder. So what they've done, they got some farmers to sort of set up this business to take the public to see them. And once the farmers had understood that this was not only an opportunity for making money, but it actually didn't damage lambs, then it developed as an opportunity.
And it's quite often public-private partnerships. So it's within national parks.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Private operators then.
And I think the very first one that was set up, he had a farmer that was interested, and the farmer had 4 kids, and he found a dead Tasmanian devil that had been killed on the road. But he'd had the young from the pouch, and he had the young in a sack, and he put the young ones on the table, and he got the kids to look at these young Tasmanian devils. And when his kids saw them, you know, he knew he got that emotional connection between the children and him, and he was away. Interesting story.
How the storytelling guys were born in Australia?
Sorry,
How the storytelling guys were born in Australia?
Do we have any education about storytelling in Australia? For the guys?
Yes.
Where did you find them?
Yes, there's Guides Association. There's Interpretation Australia. They have meetings. They get together, and like this, they have a meeting like this, and then they'll invite people to come up and tell a story. And just to really test each other out, they'll randomly give someone. They'll say, kangaroo. Tell your clients about a kangaroo. And in that way, they feed off each other, they see how good they are, they can learn from each other, and they discuss it afterwards. So yes, it's a sort of organised training program.
Okay.
Following Helena's question, is it like nature enthusiasts that turn into guides? Does it work that way, or is it like anybody that can be taken out from the street and teach him all the species,
That's a very good.
It makes a good guide?
That's a very good question, and you know, is it acting? Is it passion? What is it? I think that you have to be genuinely interested to be able to pull this off. You have to really show that you're excited yourself. I think to some degree you can learn it, but you know, a seasoned campaigner may catch you out. You know, and but I think the bottom line is, if you can have fun yourself, you've got a whole different group of people. Some people may think you're a complete idiot, but it doesn't matter. As long as you're having fun yourself and you can just check and you get people involved, and most people in that situation would engage with their enthusiasm. So it's about enthusiasm. I think you can learn it to some degree, but I think maybe the really good one, like David Attenborough, that person is born and not, you know, is born not made. So a really good one is probably, it's in them already, but I think you can learn it to a certain degree. And one of the ways we can learn it is, as I've talked, you can just get people to come out. I was at, I'm a member of the IUCN, and I went to a workshop in Malaysia where people were learning about how to conduct interpretation. We pull them out at the front and get them to talk about, say, tell us about rainforest ants. You know, this guy will stand there like this, and then you have to bring them out. But at the end of the session, they were on their way. They were on their way. They knew that that was a way to go, and it was a possibility.
Meillä tulee olemaan aikaa. What is your account?
Just about, have you got any idea about this, the volume of the guided and versus self-guided products? So how many people visitors take this guided product? How many are just walk around self-guided?
Self-guided is going to be a lot more so, because the guided is money. If the services are guided, it costs you money, and of course you can design panels and put them there, but someone who can take you and has that knowledge and the time, there's much less of that available.
And the self-guided, where do you get the revenue? Is then the map?
The self-guided, it can be promoted on the internet. You've got MP3 facilities. You've got through the phone, through iPhone, books, brochures, pamphlets. You know, like the Mount Lazur, there's all sorts of panels all along that trail, indicating various. It's at different levels. In Hong Kong Geopark, where I've looked at geological interpretation, they have a talking map. So you've got a map of Hong Kong Geopark, and you put a pen on it, and then you listen to the pen, and the pen will give you a description of the bit that you've pointed the pen on. So there's lots of different ways of doing it.
Meillä tulee olemaan aikaa vielä tässä ennen lounasta yhteenvedolle ja myös keskustelulle.